I'm Paul Belz-Templeman, the state clerk for the Presbytery of the Cascades, Synod of the Pacific, Presbyterian Church, USA. And it's great to have some clerks here and also a pastor as well, to aspiring to clerkiness. So this Clerk of Session training is brought to you by Per Capita Contributions. I am paid out of the Per Capita Fund, so when you see that annoying bill for, what is it this year, $35.50, and I'm sort of responsible for that because, well, they were saying, I can't remember what the numbers were, and I said, it's either got to be a whole number, or if we don't want to go to 36, but I thought it was too high, we'll go to $35.50. We probably could have been at $35.43, so that extra 7 cents, sorry about that. Hopefully that means next year it won't have to go up as much. But Per Capita does more than pay for the stated clerk. It actually pays for this meeting, pays for this training, it pays for all the committee work done in our presbytery. It doesn't pay for all the staff, actually. The executives, like Brian Heron, who is our Presbytery for Vision and Mission, and Clark Scalera, are actually paid out of the money that goes in for Presbytery partnership giving or mission giving. We use those terms synonymously. So we have two funds. It's a little bit confusing. But today, this is strictly per capita right now. We do say per capita is a benevolence, and sometimes people can call it a tax, but it's really a benevolence that the session controls, which means that if we send you a bill for per capita and you tell us we're not going to pay that bill, the General Assembly says it's a benevolence under the control of the session. You can't compel them to do that. Hopefully we're a Christian organization that can use, mutual accountability and love and care for one another, but I do want to point that out, that it is a benevolence. And it's also assessed, can you read this? It's assessed on a historical membership figure, so sometimes that confuses people because we're using a number from December 31st, 2008. No,
that's wrong.
2017, you're right. I updated the slides twice, so I gotta update the numbers. Some of us wish it were 2018 because our numbers declined, right? So for some of you, the next time you see it is for 2018. I wonder if I should, I'm not gonna try to fix that. Everyone knows this is really supposed to be 2017. So that creates an issue when you say, wait, our membership now that is 2019 is 5 fewer, why do we have to pay this? And it's like, well, that year when you're gonna get more members, like, hey, our membership's higher, well, you get a discount that year. So think of it that way. No one ever really sees it that way. They always say, wait a minute, thank you for the discount, but I don't want to overpay. So. All right, let's talk about Clerk of Session stuff. Each council shall elect a clerk who shall record the transactions of the council, keep its rolls of membership and attendance, preserve its records, and furnish extracts from them when required by another council of the church. That's essentially all you have to do as the Clerk of Session. It's not a lot, really, but it is a lot. Let's go through this really sort of word by word. Each council. So the church has various councils. The General Assembly is a council. The Presbytery is a council. The congregation is not a council. The session is the council at the congregational level. So the council elects the clerk, which means that I know in some churches they actually have a position on session for the Clerk of Session that gets elected, and the congregation thinks they're electing the clerk. But actually, it is the council, the session, that elects the clerk. Now, if your church does it the other way, it's not the end of the world. Usually the session is sort of behind that anyway and saying we want a person that's serving to do that. But the session, if you're without a clerk, you shouldn't have to worry about this because you are the clerk, but if there's someone else who's an elder in the congregation, it has to be an elder, a ruling elder, they could say, oh, well, so-and-so's not in session, but we're going to elect them to be the clerk for whatever the term is. And the session gets to decide if it's a 1-year term, a 3-year term, a lifetime term, a month term, all that stuff. Of course, you also have the power of resigning, right? But we don't do that. No. Unless we have to. So that's each council elects a clerk. Recording the transactions of the council means basically taking the minutes. Or if there are things that happen outside of a meeting, sometimes there's a vote outside of a meeting, we'll talk a little bit about that, making sure that gets recorded. Those are transactions. Keeping its roles of membership and attendance. So part of that is who are the members on session. And for a session meeting, we take, as part of the minutes, you'll see, you say, who's here at the meeting? These elders were present. At a congregational meeting, remember, a congregation is not a council, you don't have to record every member who's at the meeting. But at the Presbytery meeting, you'll see, if you ever read the minutes from this meeting, it'll say something like, the roster or all those in attendance are found in Appendix A, because we don't want to list those at the beginning of our minutes. It would take a lot of room, and no one will get to the meat of the matter. So that's keeping rules of membership and attendance. You also keep the rules of the congregation, and there's something in the Book of Order about that. And you preserve its records, which means making sure that they're properly kept. And we'll talk a little bit about the preservation of records, both on site, and there are archives where you can send them. And finally, furnish extracts from them when required by another council of the church. This doesn't happen very often. This is when perhaps there was a case, a judicial case in the ecclesiastical court. So we have judicial commissions. And so for some reason, let's say that the Presbytery had this matter that involved some member of your church or something, that maybe your session got really tired of their disorderly conduct or something. I'm not sure exactly what would happen. And you brought a case, somehow someone brought a case against them, and then I would, or the Judicial Commission would say, can we have the records of your minutes from March 2018 when this happened? And then, there'd be something in there like the moderator had to call the police, excuse me, or whatever. I don't know, but that's what it means to furnish extracts. Or if somebody challenges what you did on session, so the session says, we're going to use a designated fund. There was a fund that was set up to provide horseshoes for the minister's horse when they're traveling to Presbytery meetings. And the session decides, I think there's an equivalence that we can get tires for the pastor's car. And someone in the church says, Balderdash, I happen to have a horse farm. I don't know why the pastor has never bought a horse from me. And this fund was designated for horseshoes. And you're all wondering, this sounds like a bunch of horse something else. But somehow that comes to me, and I was like, can I please see the minutes of when you actually took that action to designate money to purchase tires for the car? That's a little wild and hypothetical, so. But do you get the point? Sort of? Okay. Rarely happens, so I don't want to spend a lot more time on it, but it was kind of fun to create a story out of thin air. All right. So we're going to talk about many of these aspects today, if not all of them. All right, so again, here are the duties in another form: recording transactions, rolls and registers of the session and the congregation, the attendance at session, preserve the rolls and registers, and report to the Presbytery and the PCUSA, which I think was in there, I can't remember now, but it should have been. And when we report, there's a minutes review where higher councils review the actions of lower councils. So we review the minutes of congregations, sessions in congregations. My minutes, or the minutes of this body, the Presbytery, are reviewed by the Synod. And then the Synod minutes are reviewed at the General Assembly. The General Assembly reviews its own minutes because there's no higher body. Compliance with policies. So we do ask for a few different reports, and it's your responsibility to make sure somehow they get to the Presbytery, whether you do that or someone else does that. And there is the annual statistical report. Did anyone do the annual statistical report that you did? Yes. Okay, so the annual statistical report is it can be a fairly challenging thing. And in the past, it was actually quite challenging, and we were hoping it was going to get simplified at the General Assembly. But when it went to the committee at General Assembly, and my son was on this committee, they added some things back, and actually in some ways may have made it more complicated. And so one of the staff members from the General Assembly, when she saw me in October, she said, "You look just like your son. We got to talk about your son." He was had a very strong opinion, and I said, "You should know your dad would say this is crazy." And I said, I went to lunch with him at General Assembly, we started to talk about it, and I suddenly realized my 19-year-old son had a very different opinion than I did, And this was not an argument I wanted to have over lunch. So I thought it would only make things worse. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about some of the statistical reports that come out. I mean, some of them are simple, I think. They're, how many members did you started with this number of members. You added some members because people joined, maybe they joined because they were baptized for the first time. Others were transferred from congregations. Others, we couldn't get a transfer. Not all churches transfer folks, not because they don't like us. They're just like, we don't even know what that means. So they joined by affirmation of faith. Of course, some people die, some people move away. So you got some pluses, minuses, and at the end, hopefully it balances to what you have in your book. And then there are other questions that are asked about how many people are different ages, how many people are in session. That should be an easy one. But the ages, and they've been asking about disabilities and even racial ethnic categories, are challenging. And they've said, use your, just you and the pastor, clerk, just use your best guess, which is not really a good way to create statistics, right? And so that was the point of the staff of the General Assembly is very few people are looking at these, and these statistics are not in any way accurate. Why are we even doing this? We try to ask people to do it. They either don't report or they just kind of make a wild guess. So anyway, but the General Assembly, commissioners and young adult advisory delegates like my son, said, I think we ought to do that. So that's what we're doing. Sorry about that. There's also financial. That's something hopefully you can get from the treasurer. I do think that financial was easier this year.
It was way easier.
Yes. Because it was basically how much money came in from basically anything. And then how much money went out, and then how much of the money that went out for personnel or salaries and all that kind of thing. How much went out for mission, how much went out for buildings, is that right? So that was a little easier than in the past where it seemed like there were 9 or 10 columns of things, and no one quite understood what they were, and there was like capital expenditures, and they're like, well, is this capital expenditure?
Yeah, our treasurer asked me, she says, Bill, is this really all they're asking for? She really noticed the difference.
Wow. She was disappointed, I'm sure. What do I do with my free time? Okay. So anyway, I probably went into that too much because we're going to come back to it. But resources, there's always the Book of Order. And I used to have a lot of these books that were this very color. But I gave my last one away by accident. I'd actually written in it and said, oh, you need this, give it back to me. But it's great when the Book of Order is read. Maybe it's not being read, but I like to think that person is reading it. There's the Book of Confessions, because our Constitution as a church, we're not just driven by a lot of rules and policies, we're also governed by our confessional statements that hopefully help us understand and interpret the Scripture. Even though they're under the Scripture. I guess I should have put Scripture in there too. That would be a good resource for a clerk. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Uh-oh.
I have a question.
Yes?
This may not be the right place, but Book of Order may. We had a discussion on the way here about Robert's Rules of Order and
Yes.
how much we hate them.
Good.
And how church sessions never actually operate by
Exact
Robert's rules. Is there anything in the book, I couldn't remember, is there anything in the Book of Order that says specifically that all councils must use Robert's rules?
Yes, it actually does say all councils must use Robert's rules. Your congregation actually, though, isn't a council. There are some congregations that use like Jefferson's rules, or probably not Mason's rules.
Roberta's rules, there's a really nice.
Sturge's rules, or whatever. But it does say that we have to use Robert's Rules of Order. However, Robert's Rules of Order, and we'll get into this at the end, there is something called small board rules of order. So in a small board, Robert's Rules of Order is designed for an organization of 50 to thousands of people. And so that's why there's a lot of rules. So Robert's Rules itself actually says, on a small board, or a session really is a small board, they say something like no larger than 12, but what I've heard is, it's basically about how contentious the body is. You could have 6 people that you need the whole book, but you can have 18 people who are generally getting along, and you can use sort of a small, I would think anything under like 24, I would use what are called small board rules, and we'll talk about that at the end. I've got some slides that show some of that. So that can answer some of the questions. I mean, yeah, well, let's wait till then, because otherwise it'll just be repetitive.
Yeah, well,
Maybe, if maybe not. Yes?
what will happen if a church does not strictly follow that rule Robert's Rule of Order or whatever.
I don't know.
Semi, partly that and partly just being practical.
Well, and actually there is a rule in Robert's Rules of Order that says, if the chair or moderator or president or whatever realizes that Robert's Rules is going to get in the way of making a fair decision, it is the duty of that person to say, look, we can go through all this rigmarole, but here's a simple way to get there. Is everyone okay with that? So you can still do that. I mean, because sometimes you get through this whole thing, you're like, well, I think we have a secondary amendment to this amendment, and there was something about, and if everyone's just clear, this sounds really good, and you say, that secondary amendment goes with this and this, and if we do it all like this, is that okay? And everyone says yes, you don't even have to take a vote, you've just taken a vote, which is called unanimous consent. We'll talk about that.
That happens for smaller churches
Yes.
like ours. It's like, no, we just said we do that.
Right. In fact, Robert's Rules of Order says in small boards, sometimes the motions are assumed.
Exactly, I mean,
Yeah.
we were talking about that you have conversation first before there's
Yes.
a motion, which is opposite to Robert's
Right.
Rules. But
Except
it's-
Robert's Rules small board does say
Yeah.
you can speak without a motion on the floor.
There's an interesting article regarding ruling elders, maybe the last two issues, I think, that talked about the difference between using Robert's Rules of Order versus consensus.
Oh, okay, and then there's consensus as well, which is slightly different than Robert's Rules of Order. And
Definitely.
you can use, because Robert's Rules also says you can use other methods to get there. But the fallback is if a member says, I don't like this consensus process, I think we need to do it by the book is Robert's Rules of Order. But generally, when you're doing things by consensus, if you have a lot of trust in everything, that works. So as long as someone's objecting, you're generally okay. I want to be careful saying that, because then someone will say, well, Paul said I can. It's like, no, I didn't know you were talking about that, but I think we're all on the same page. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's actually really helpful to know, because sometimes when you come to a Presbytery meeting or go to a General Assembly or something, and you go back to your session thinking, oh, we don't know what we're doing. And it's not true. There's a different set of rules. Okay, there's also something called the Church Manual of Operations, and the Book of Order says, and I probably should have put the citation here, that every church should have a Manual of Operations. Actually, the Manual of Operations is bylaws. That's really all it needs to be. You could have standing rules, which are less common. The Presbytery has some, which are not a good model of standing rules, I don't believe, but they're a variety of rules. Actually, our bylaws, our standing rules have special rules of order, which are basically where we say, Robert's Rules of Order says X, but we're going to do it this way. And Robert's Rules of Order says if you have those special rules of order, they're equal to Robert's Rules of Order. But if they fall away, then you always have Robert's Rules of Order to go back. That's why the book is 800-something pages long. And you could have manuals or various committees and various procedures, counting the offering and so on. Those could go in your Manual of Operations. So larger churches sometimes have them, smaller churches have maybe have fewer, or maybe they can capture what they do in the bylaws, especially in this time when a lot of us are in transition. It still functions well without having a lot of duties assigned to a committee, or the Christian Education Committee will have Christian Education on the fourth Tuesday of the month or whatever. They're like, what about Wednesday? So they don't have to be as strict as they used to be, but you do need to have bylaws. I hope everyone has bylaws. I do have a resource that I can send you that has links to bylaws and some other policies that we encourage you to have.
Are standing rules sort of like what I'm used to referring to as policies of the board? In this case, policies of the session?
So standing rules are interesting because they have a lower level than bylaws, and they can be
Right.
set aside by a majority vote during a meeting if they apply to a meeting. So a good example of a standing rule is during the meeting, all members will wear a name badge. That's one standing rule. We don't have a standing rule, but that would be an example. And then in the meeting, someone could say, a bunch of people don't have name badges, and we ran out of the little sticky things, or someone misplaced them, and someone go, I move to suspend the rule. Okay, we'll suspend the rule for the meeting. Or you have to wear a coat and tie at the meeting. Other standing rules are, I don't know. They're basically, they are, often they are like a board policy, I think.
Okay,
Yeah, they're probably not identical.
yeah, they fall behind the bylaws. Bylaws are the highest level, they take precedence, and everything has to meet
Yes.
their standards.
Right, and that's a good thing to remember. Yeah, because if the bylaws say something, you can change it, but it's a very lengthy process to change. They're
Yes.
harder to change.
Yes.
Whereas a policy should probably be easier to change. Not super easy, but you have to amend the policy, and that requires usually a 2/3 vote, but it can even require a majority vote with notice. But bylaws require all sorts of things.
Yeah.
The policies can be adjusted within the session, whereas bylaws eventually, at least in our congregation, get referred to the congregation for final.
Yes, and that question comes up sometimes with bylaws because the Book of Order will tell you what can happen in a congregational meeting. Only these things can happen in a congregational meeting, and if you look through it, it nowhere says they can amend their bylaws. So people
Well,
have
we're a
asked,
corporation.
well, right. So someone has asked the General Assembly, like, how come we can't do this? And they said, we can't list everything you can do in your meeting. It's like, but you said these were the only things we can do. They're like, well, yes, except, like you said, the corporation, they have to do that. So actually some organizations allow their board of directors, which is sort of like a session in some ways, to amend bylaws. But I believe in the Presbyterian system, the bylaws are the congregation's document, and that's who amends it. So, and yeah, I don't know if it's a hard and fast rule. It seems to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me know if I'm confusing it yet. But I don't think standing rules, most congregations probably are not going to have, or sessions are not going to have standing rules. They might, but, because the session could develop its own standing rules or whatever, but they're probably going to develop policies, which are slightly different than standing
I
rules.
was just gonna say, we have lots of policies and procedures, but I don't think they would rise to standing rules in most cases.
Yeah. In some ways, they actually are because they have standing. They have duration, right? They don't end generally. So they are like a standing. They are standing, but they're standing policies. So that's probably better term.
Yeah.
All right. What time is it? I don't want to get too far behind here. Okay. I just want to briefly talk about the types of meetings you're going to encounter as a clerk of session. I don't mean like the contentious ones that make you go home and have a bottle of wine. I mean,
You might need one.
Yeah. On the way back, we might make some more stops.
oh, okay. So one kind of meeting is the congregational meeting. So the clerk is the clerk of session, but however, the clerk is also the secretary of the congregation according to the Book of Order. If the clerk is unavailable, so if you as the clerk can't make the annual meeting for whatever reason, maybe you're on vacation, the congregation elects the secretary
For that meeting.
for that meeting. However, I have a workaround, which is this. It seems to me that if I know that my clerk of session is going to be gone for the annual meeting, and it's not that the person gets sick or whatever right before, the session could elect a clerk pro tem. And the reason I say that is, I've been to congregational meetings where the first order of business was to elect a secretary, and in that congregation, people are like, nobody wanted to nominate her. It's just like, let's just get it done here and just move forward with the meeting. Like, why waste people's time with that? But if a congregation enjoys that kind of thing, allow them to elect a secretary. Maybe they want to have several secretaries, a recording secretary, whatever. Vice secretary. The vice secretary keeps the wine. All right, so must give notice. Bylaws may be specific. Should be specific, actually. So you can't just have a congregational meeting after worship. You can't announce it after worship. Technically, you can according to the Book of Order.
I was gonna say, is that not in Book of Order anymore?
There used to be was it 2 successive Sundays?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They took that out of the Book of Order.
Oh,
But what you need to know is, I think we're all here from
I think
Oregon.
it's in our bylaws.
In Oregon, and if it's in your bylaws, you have to follow your bylaws. In Oregon, you have to have 10 days notice. So if you're doing 2 weeks, you're
Right.
Right. In Washington State, I was just reading that, and apparently it has to be in something, what do they call it? Something like, it has to be in matter, like you actually have to it has to be something that's a tangible thing, physical.
Huh.
Yeah, it's not like you can, I guess sound waves are physical, but anyway, it was kind of weird. It was like, oh, you can't send an
So-
electronic notice.
Is that because, you're talking about state levels, is that because of the corporation?
That's because of the corporate, if you're gonna do some sort of corporate business. And you are really, because you're usually required to have an annual meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were gonna have a special meeting to elect a pastor or something, maybe you could get away with something else, but your bylaws probably are covering you there. Though there are people with bylaws that don't talk about the annual meeting because it used to be in the book of order and they've never amended it. So in that case, there's a hierarchy of what the precedence is, and one of them is, state law. So you
You
don't
brought
want to
up another good point there on electronic distribution and electronic voting.
Oh.
What is the stance of the Presbytery on, say you had to give 2 weeks' notice, could one of them be an electronic notice to everybody or not?
I believe so. In fact, that's how we do it as a presbytery. Our notice is entirely electronic right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't have email, you're probably not going to get noticed. But we are very clear in our bylaws that that's what it is.
Okay.
We can talk about electronic voting too, which I'm getting more and more confused on, even though I was very clear on it at one point.
It'll be like the GA, click, vote if you want.
Well,
yes.
that would be nice if we all had that at home, but no. So that was the notice. And again, congregation is not a council. A session is, you can see the Book of Order G10503 for business proper to a congregational meeting, or you can see the next slide, which is basically at a congregational meeting, it's property matters, calls of pastors, and change of calls. So congregation, if you have property and you're doing anything with your property, I mean, leases are fine, but if you're disposing of property or acquiring property, the congregation has to be involved. As does, changing the terms of call for a pastor who's called. Some of you may have temporary supply pastors, stated supply, or interims and so on. Those are handled by the session, but the calls of pastors are handled by the congregation. That's where we elect our deacons and elders, and possibly trustees, if the session is not the trustees, according to your bylaws. Adopting or changing bylaws, and asking the Presbytery to waive requirements that officers serve no more than 6 years in a row. So there's that whole thing, you can only serve 2 terms, or terms no more than 6 years. But there is actually a waiver for congregations. It's generally for a smaller congregation that needs to do this. And we've done this maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 15 years that I've been here, where we said to a congregation, okay, you can have
So
2
you
months.
actually have to ask Presbytery if you're going to...
If you're going to break the Book of Order, it's a Book of Order requirement of 6 years.
Okay,
So it's not, the requirement is it's 6 years unless Presbytery gives you a waiver.
okay.
And this comes from 1955 when we decided that we were going to elect people to terms. It used to be elder for life in one session until it killed you.
Is there a requirement for the terms of the commissioners to the Presbytery?
There is not a requirement for terms. I think it's considered usually annual. It's probably a good practice. Some people have done, I guess, longer, and others have done shorter.
I know, because in our church, we have been every year, I go like, Pastor, when are we going to elect the new commissioners? Oh, you two just go ahead, and nobody wants to be commissioners, so
What time is it?
we're
Okay.
here forever.
Okay. Yes, well, electing commissioners is a good thing. It's not necessarily the clerk's responsibility, but it is the session's responsibility. But it's also challenging sometimes to get commissioners. I don't know why. It's so much fun being here.
I agree, I think it's neat.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's like GA groupies. You
gotta
have to find the right people who actually enjoy
Right.
the.
That's
give and
true.
take.
That's true. And people have told me, why do you do Clerk of Session training, Paul? No one's going to go to it. Well, that's not the kind of person that's ever going to come to this, right? That's right. But you're here, I'm having a good time. I'm like, these are my people, So that's where I want to be.
There are a few of those strange ones around.
There are, yeah. It's good to get together every so often and chuckle at these things. So here's something called a regular or stated meeting. And I'm just realizing I didn't know how I organized it this way, but because the congregation can have a regular meeting, their annual meeting. They can also have a special meeting. So they decide to call a pastor in the middle of the year. They decide to purchase or sell property in the beginning of the year, the middle of the year. Perhaps they need to
They
elect,
have to fill a vacancy.
Some churches I know just appoint people, but you're not supposed to do that. So don't tell me if you do. Don't do it. All right. So there are reasons you might have a special meeting, so congregations as well as sessions can have regular and special meetings. There's a third kind, but I'm not going to, unless you ask, I'm not going to tell you about the third kind of meeting. So The regular meeting, and I know you're going to ask now, so that's why I did that. So the regular meeting is when you meet on a regular basis. Often the bylaws say the session is going to meet monthly. Maybe it even says the session meets monthly on a Tuesday. Hopefully it's not super precise, like 7:15 on a Tuesday. This is probably the most common meeting. Okay, so that's your regular meeting or stated meeting. But it's important when you do minutes to say you're in a regular meeting or stated meeting, or something like that. Normal meeting, probably regular stated or those. Then there's the special meeting. It's a meeting called for a special purpose. Often I know they're called for new members. There's some people that want to join the church. Let's have a meeting after worship to do this. Or I call it untimely business. It came up after the last meeting and it needs to be handled before the following meeting. So you call a special meeting. You take minutes in a special meeting just like a regular meeting, but you never approve minutes in a special meeting. It has to be approved at the next regular meeting. So if you have a regular meeting and then you call a special meeting, you don't ever read the minutes. I mean, unless you call the meeting to read the minutes, which would be odd. You could do that. But normally you don't read the minutes. And the point about a special meeting is, if you come to a special meeting, the call of the meeting was to receive some bids and get this roof repaired before the next rainstorm. So you have a special meeting on a Tuesday. And someone goes, oh, by the way, now that we're at the special meeting, I was wondering if we ought to buy another set of handbells, and I'm going to make a motion. Well, you can't do that because a special meeting can only do what's in the call to the meeting, right? So when there's a special meeting, there's not any new business or, hey, anyone have any other ideas here? Like, no, it's only what you said in the meeting, and the call should go out, we don't say it's sort of a reasonable amount of time, so hopefully at least 24 hours, maybe 48 hours ahead of time. Some sessions say it's by email, or some say by telephone. So our board of trustees at the Presbytery, if we send an email out or by mail, we have to give a week's notice to call a special meeting. But if we do it by phone, we just call people up, 48 hours. And we would do our meetings electronically, so not themselves. Okay, special. Any thoughts on that?
There could be a reason, a called meeting might have 2 items of business.
Yeah.
As long as
Oh, yes.
both were
Yes.
noted
Sorry,
in
yes.
the call, is that correct?
Good point. You can have 50 things on there as long as you were noted in the call. We are having a special meeting next Thursday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be to talk about the roof repairs and the handbells and a new
The
alarm
tires.
system. And the tires. Yeah.
So
And-
you cannot talk if somebody say, can we talk about this, whatever matter, right now,
Right.
because I think it's important.
You say no.
You'd have to say no. Now here's something
Yeah, because
interesting.
it's not in the,
What if your whole session was at that meeting? And someone said, I don't know why we didn't put this in here, we didn't do this, the whole session's there, and everyone agrees it's okay, you can get away with that, because the special meeting is to protect the rights of someone who says, if it was, the special meeting is called so that we can raise Pastor Neeson's salary to $500,000, and, right, then everyone's gonna show up to that meeting. Everyone's gonna show up and amend it to $1 million, right? So, but if someone brings that up in a meeting, like, oh, since we're here to talk about the roof, how about we start paying the Clerk of Session should get a stipend of $5,000 a month? Sounds good to me. Like someone else had no idea. They didn't get warned about this. There was no warning. So that's why special meetings, you have to have this warning.
so anything is like, no.
Okay. All those in favor of the stipend? No. Okay. This is.
We have money.
Forget it, the moderator is voting against.
I want to have a job for a little while, right? Okay. Executive session. Have you all heard of executive session?
Oh, yes.
Technically, session meetings can be closed meetings, all of them. There was a time when we were encouraging folks to actually have all open meetings, and I don't know what happened to that back in the 1980s, but I think a lot of sessions just allow people to come to the meeting, and I don't see a problem with it. I mean, the Presbytery meeting itself technically could be a closed meeting. We're not going to do that. But
How
there
often
could
do you have somebody else show up for one of these meetings?
Well, we often do have some visitors,
Presbytery.
spouses and so on.
Oh.
And I was in a church once where there were more people that were not on session in the meeting than people on session.
Well, we have staff at all of our session meetings beyond the moderator.
Right.
They're coming to give reports because we don't have written reports
Yes.
in our congregation.
And the staff also often.
We have committee written reports.
Yeah.
We don't have staff written reports.
Okay.
Right, okay, so that makes sense too. In an executive session, it's basically like there's a personnel issue, or maybe you were gonna talk about the bids on the roof and someone's there from one of the companies or something, one of your members, it's like, we're gonna ask everyone to leave. So to go into executive session, you just need to either, if it's your custom, or you always do it, like personnel matter maybe, you just say, we're in executive session now. You still take minutes. Now, minutes doesn't mean you record everything everybody said. It's only if there's a motion that is made and it's seconded and it gets voted on. Well, or maybe it doesn't get voted on. Anyway, if the motion is made, that was what would go in the minutes. You can keep them separate, like under another cover, if they're very sensitive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, your session minutes are only available to session members, technically. But a lot of people put in their newsletter what the session did. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's actually really good practice. But you could just say we also want to do executive. You wouldn't even need to say you want to do executive session probably in your newsletter, but you do. You go into executive session. You do take minutes. Now, the funny thing is, you go into executive session and you take minutes. And then the next meeting you come back, and sometimes people have the minutes printed out for that, and they hand them out and ask for them back. So it's a way of protecting the minutes, because usually we just distribute the minutes when you think, and that's just a way of controlling sensitive information. But you can only approve minutes of executive session in executive session. Now what happens then, so we're in executive session to deal with personnel matter, we resolve it with a motion, the next meeting we approve it in executive session, we close executive session. How do we approve those minutes? So the next meeting we have another executive session to do that minutes.
So it keeps going and going and going, or what?
No, but that's actually what could happen. So,
And ideally, the only people you hand the minutes out to are the people that attended that executive session, not the session members that weren't there.
I don't know about that.
I think that's right, because it's totally a privacy issue.
That's a good question. That's a good answer, but it seems like they would have the right to know as session members.
I would think so,
Yeah.
but the way, I'm going by the
Trying to
way
keep them
the
from finding
moderator,
out.
I mean, the clerk down in Medford,
By the time
Tam.
you walk out of the parking lot,
Tam said,
everyone
this is what
knows.
Tam said. So
Interesting.
it's not, I didn't look in Robert's rules.
I've read Robert's Rules several times. It doesn't say that, so I'm not sure. This is what I would say though. Before we have the infinite regress of executive sessions, when you have an executive session that just approves the minutes of an executive session, it is assumed that the record of that, what is the meeting, the minutes of that meeting would be, we went into executive session to approve the minutes, and you just put those minutes in your regular minutes. It's like, oh no, they just divulged that they did something in executive session which was approved minutes. Well, no, it actually, technically, you can go into executive session and decide you're going to report what was in executive session. It's just you don't have to, you don't need to. But if you decide, that we thought it was a tornado and it was just a windstorm, and or whatever, I'm just metaphorically about a personnel issue. Everything's great. We were going to censure this person. Now we're going to commend them. Well, by all means, you can publish those minutes. So, but I hope that's enough about executive session. You go into executive session and you go out of it. Or you could say our next meeting is going to be an executive session because we've got a lot to do, and the whole meeting is going to be executive session. But technically, you would just ask people to leave. You could have staff stay if they needed to stay. There are certain times you need staff in the room to do certain things or to give certain reports. But otherwise, you would ask them to leave, generally. Does that help?
Mhm.
Maybe? Okay. All right, there was one other type of meeting. It's called an adjourned meeting. I'm glad you asked. An adjourned meeting is basically you get towards the end of the time, but you've still got a lot of business left, and it's Wednesday night, and it's 9:30, and you're just like, what are we doing here? How about we call an adjourned meeting Sunday after church and just get through the rest of this business? Okay, not a special meeting, it's an adjourned meeting, so it's still like the meeting continues on. The first thing you do in an adjourned meeting is you take the minute, you read the minutes from the last meeting and approve them, or distribute them and approve them, and then business kind of goes on. I don't know if anyone has ever done an adjourned meeting. It doesn't seem like something that would necessarily come up. A lot of times usually you're like, oh, we're really tired, we can just wait till the next month to do this business, and that's what you do. But if you had something like, wow, we really need to talk about this, we didn't get through it, you wouldn't have to call a special meeting. You do an adjourned meeting, then you don't have to give notice for it. You give notice at that meeting. So it's just something if you just keep it in your back pocket, but I don't think you're gonna see that. I hope not. What to put in the minutes? Actions. So what's in the minutes? Actions. Well, the type of meeting, regular or special, or adjourned. The church name, then session. The date and time of the meeting and the place. The persons in attendance and their roles, the moderator and clerk. So that's that part for session minutes where you need to have the attendees, the members who are there. And if the minutes of a previous meeting were read and approved or read and corrected, you don't need to specify the correction. So if someone says, oh, we have the wrong name for someone, you just say the minutes were approved as corrected. You don't say were approved after we corrected, Mike's name in Milt and whatever, You don't have to do that. Sometimes people do. It's not like an illegal practice or anything, but you don't need to. Okay. So do you read the minutes? Because we often talk about reading the minutes. There was a time when we didn't have a lot of technology or even printing presses, so minutes were often read. Someone read the minutes from the last session, and everyone says, that sounds right, or what'd you say? That's not how that motion went, so that's how they did that. Now, usually minutes are approved as distributed. A lot of times we send them out by email ahead of time, right? So that would be a phrase you could use, minutes approved as distributed. Minutes approved as corrected, if there was a correction. Now, if someone later wants to correct approved minutes, all you're doing is you're amending something previously adopted, which requires a 2/3 vote of the body or previous notice. And then it's a majority vote. Or actually could be a majority of the membership of the session. So I don't really want to think about that, but it actually works really well, majority of membership of the session. If you have 6 people on session, you just need, you need 4 either way, majority or, but if you have 10 people on session, you would need what? Well, you still need 6. Anyway, it has to be a little larger body, anyway. So let's not worry about that. So that's also true for congregational meeting minutes. Some people wait till the next year to have the congregation approve the minutes. It's a bad practice. Robert's Rule says you should always approve minutes within a quarter. And even within a quarter, I've already forgotten half of what went on, even though I took the minutes. What did I write? So the sooner the better. And the Book of Order used to say that the session will approve the congregation's meeting at the next congregational meeting minutes at the next session meeting. And so you should, that's great. And it got left out of the new Book of Order. We simplified the Book of Order, I guess. So it's not there. But that's the practice to use. And then if someone at the annual meeting the next year sees the minutes and goes, what? They can always go through this process of saying, I want to change it. And I also say as little as possible.
I like that.
You don't, you can say, so for instance, if there's this long amendment process to a motion, you just record the motion as it was adopted, but say after, parenthetically is what they call it. After amendment and debate, the motion was adopted too, and then just that motion. You don't have to say, first someone said this, and I got defeated, and they said this. No, all you have to do is the final outcome. You don't have to have every motion, like procedural motions, like someone said. Sometimes people they move to recess or something. You don't have to do that. It's just what actions happened at that meeting going forward. So as little as possible.
And we talked about this on the way, and I don't know the answer. Are you still supposed to record the maker of motions?
That is a really good question. Robert's Rules of Order recommends it. It's interesting because once a motion is made and seconded, or actually doesn't need a second in a small board, once a motion is stated by the chair, it becomes the property of the session. It no longer belongs to the maker. Oh. So there's a strong argument for not. Some people actually put the who seconded the motion. Mm-hmm. But there's not really a need to do that. But Robert's Rule says you should still keep the maker of the motion in there. But sometimes there's a number of reasons why you won't see the maker of a motion in there. Maybe because you forgot who it was. Maybe you don't know their name. Here, I'm just going to pass these out. Just take one and pass them down.
Go down, yeah. I read someplace where, if the person who made the motion requests that their name be recorded.
Yes.
Such as,
Then it has to
and
be.
also if the person who's voting against it wants to go on record as having voted against a motion, that's when you record their name.
Yes. And I didn't actually have that in here. That's a good thing. There is something, if someone says, I dissent from this motion, I want to be noted in the minutes as
Yes.
dissented from it.
Then you have to record it.
It's a good idea to write it down, yeah. Actually, not a good idea. It is what you must do.
Yeah.
I think this may be helpful. Here's just a sample set of minutes that I think I did these fairly quickly the other day. But, at the top, your heading, you put your church name. This is one form. The other thing, though, is sometimes people get really concerned when they've seen one form and then they review someone else's minutes. They're like, that doesn't look right. There's more than one way to do it, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your temperament. I have some things in italics. So this is a state at a regular meeting. If it were a special meeting, that would be noted instead. This paragraph here actually comes from Robert's Rules of Order, from their section on how to do the minutes of a meeting. It's a little bit archaic, I guess, but it's actually not a bad practice. The session of the church, whatever the name is, met at its stated, or I can say special, meeting at 7 p.m. on January 5th in the narthex of the church. In 2019, I meant to get that out of there. It's supposed to be January 5th, 2019. I don't know what happened. I did that twice. And then here, with the moderator in the chair and the clerk of session present. So that's just this language that they say should be in the minutes to say that the moderator was there and the clerk was there.
You can figure it out from the minutes if it's not there.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm going next. So then I said, Sally Smith opened the meeting with prayer. All meetings are open and closed with prayer. Not according to Robert, according to John Kelly. No, sorry. Okay. And then it says, you must record who's present at meetings, and the session is a council. So then I have present at the meeting, and I hopefully remember their names when I appointed them to committees as well. The minutes of the previous meeting are usually taken up as the first item of business. You normally approve congregational meetings minutes as well as session minutes if there was a congregational meeting. So, right, the minutes of the December 14th meeting were distributed and approved as corrected. Or it can just been were approved as distributed.
I love your inclusive membership.
I tried, but I had to be the clerk because I had my own little signature I could throw in there. So the clerk could read a correspondence. There was a letter from J. Herbert Nelson, the state clerk, as a nomination. And then I said report and record any votes taken outside of a meeting or by an administrative commission. So sometimes in the Book of Order it says that for especially for membership, if you can't get your whole session to bring in members, I believe it's 2 elders and then the moderator or a minister can serve as this administrative commission to receive members into the church. So I'm going to have some reports here. There's an email vote, which I think someone asked about. If you have, we won't talk too much about that because I'm very confused right now. I thought I had it nailed, but now I'm not sure. But we have to record that vote. That vote didn't happen in a meeting. The email voting wasn't a meeting, but we're going to record it. So we took the action on December 19th, approved 5 gallons of roof goop or whatever to repair that. And then we had an administrative commission appointed to receive John Jones into membership. It had completed its work and voted to affirmatively to receive Mr. Jones, request his transfer from other town on January 3rd. And then we had a motion there that was just sort of incidental to that it was MSP. Sometimes you'll see that. People just abbreviate move, second, pass. Sometimes it's MSA, move, second. What do you think?
Approved.
Approved or adopted.
Yeah.
I've seen MSC.
Confirmed.
With
Similar.
yeah.
Confirmed, yeah. MSC, MSP, and MSA. There might be another one too, I don't know.
Carrie, so, yeah.
Yeah,
Or
MSU.
carry.
Yeah, MSU, move seconded unanimous.
Ah,
That's an abbreviation I've used when I'm
Okay.
taking minutes.
Interesting. I never saw that one before.
I thought you were gonna say MSG.
No.
And then, so anyway, there was an administrative commission that was also dismissed. Did I put the pastor on there? Yes, I did. Okay. Let me make sure. Treasurer's report, this is a very brief treasurer's report. Sometimes the treasurer's report is a lot longer. You can also say the treasurer's report was received. You don't have to vote to receive reports. If someone gives you a report, it is received. You're like, wait, we didn't receive a report? Hey, you did. We just spent 20 minutes listening to this person. And you don't want to adopt reports unless you want to agree with every word of the report. So you don't adopt a report unless you agree with everything that's in it. So you might, like, here's a policy. We're going to adopt a policy, right? Agree with every minute. But if it's a report, you might not want to adopt it. Sometimes you can append. You can say the treasurer's report, especially if it's like a spreadsheet or balance or whatever, or is appended in Appendix A. There's a Christian education report. Again, I tried to keep that fairly short. I could have even kept it shorter and said, Sally Smith gave the Christian education report, period. That might have worked. I have a motion agreed to by unanimous consent. Without objection, it was agreed to purchase 5 Bibles for the elementary level Sunday school class. So, especially in a small church board, I've seen this happen a lot. People are talking, and they're like, what about that in the Sunday school class? We've got 5 kids in there, so-and-so bringing 3 of her friends, and now there's 5 of them, and shouldn't we get them Bibles? And they're like, yeah, and then the moderator says, are we all in agreement with that? Or the technical way that in Robert's Rules of Order says, unless there's objection, hearing no objection, we're going to buy the 5 Bibles. Or unless there's objection, we will order the purchase of the 5 Bibles. Hearing no objection, you pause, right? Because some of it might be slow. It's so ordered. And that goes in the minutes. It could just say by unanimous consent. Every time I use unanimous consent, someone says, I don't like the word unanimous, blah, blah, blah. So I just say without objection. That's the same thing. It used to be called general consent, which means the same. It means no one objected. It doesn't mean they agreed. You might say this is a dumb idea, but I'm not going to waste my breath on it. Go ahead. So you've consented. You don't agree with it. It's not your favorite thing. So that's how you might do that if it's unanimous consent.
The chocolate
Yeah, there you go.
If a motion doesn't pass, it's still recorded. So I have a motion to purchase the Radical Faith Bible Study DVDs for $1,000. The motion was lost. Let's see, what else? Amendments are usually noted parenthetically, a couple paragraphs down. It was MSP after discussion and amendment to serve communion on the first Sunday of each month in 2019, as well as on Ash Wednesday and Monday, Thursday. So maybe there was an amendment to say, hey, why don't we serve communion on Ash Wednesday? So we just added it in there. We didn't tell people exactly what the amendment was. We all agree that the end result is what matters.
Question. Our reports from committees are written and received via email in advance ordinarily. And the practice has simply been to say, if there were no actions from those reports, that he simply has been recording the written report was received.
Sounds good. Actually, this sounds good because that's one where it wasn't delivered orally, right? So, yeah. I mean, if the expectation is everyone's going to read the report, I mean, I guess if someone says, hey, I never got that email, that might create another issue, but I'm sure you can work around that, especially because there's no action items in it. So.
Right, and that's what our minutes say. It says committee reports, and it's beyond those distributed in the packet, because everybody got reports ahead of time.
Right.
But then if there are actions from those committees, that's what goes in the minutes. That's what it triggers, and our moderator puts those actions in the agenda so we know these are the things that have to, the committees that have actions for us.
And that actually raises a good point that I don't believe I've covered. We should keep our committee reports in some form, either appended to the minutes or in a separate place. They are considered a permanent record. They're not as important as the session because they're usually making recommendations and so on. And hopefully they're reporting all that in the minutes if they're carried out in action. But they are important to keep in some way.
Yeah, I realized when I first went to Bandon, reading the session reports did not give me a whole lot of information because most of the action, with the exception of some I mean, obviously, some required session action, but most of what was really going on was reported in committee reports.
Right.
So if for no other reason, then someday some other pastor is going to need to have some background information. The committee reports are a valuable source of information.
They can be.
Keep them with the minutes of the meeting.
You could keep them separate. You could keep like, here's the minutes of the Buildings and Grounds Committee. It's a binder that's just kept in order.
Yeah.
Oh, by
Or you
committee
could,
then.
or you
Okay.
could, it's either
Or it
way.
could be all committees in one binder, and you just have a tab for each committee.
Yeah,
But your minutes of the session are gonna be reviewed by the Presbytery. Presbytery doesn't need to see all those committee reports. So they're
Okay.
not gonna go in your minutes book.
right.
Okay,
But sometimes they do. Sometimes committee reports are important enough, you put them with the minutes. And you make that judgment,
Right.
Yeah.
This is really important, But generally, I would say err on the side of brevity, even though it is challenging for people to come later and read. They would like more information, I know as a pastor. And, you come to a church, you're like, what's been going on here? If the minutes are very brief. At the Aurora Presbyterian Church, all the action, all the items that came in were bought by the Presbyterian women. So those were the minutes I needed to read, because that told me why the church was furnished the way it was, which was amazing. It's like, no money came out of the church coffers, it was all Presbyterian women that did all the hard work. So, anyway, there's just different kinds of motions in here that might be helpful. Also under worship committee, there's a motion that's been temporarily disposed of. So that means, supposing you're working on something at a meeting and you say, you've got a motion and you say, let's deal with this next month for whatever reason. We're just going to postpone until next month. We'll get some more information. We'll have a chance to think about it. You'd want to record that in the minutes, and that would also help when you're preparing the agenda for the next month, not to forget it. But it's been postponed. It really needs to be docketed in the next month or put on the agenda because you've taken an action to temporarily dispose of it. So that would go in your minutes as well. You'll see the building and grounds report, quite brief. New business, I basically had there, someone said they were going to make a motion in February to amend the kitchen policy by adding an exception to allow session members to store groceries in the freezer during session meetings. So if someone makes a notice of motion, and I guess because they're going to amend a policy, and to amend a policy requires a 2/3 vote unless you give previous notice. Previous notice only takes a majority vote. Maybe they want to hedge their bet a little bit there on there. Because everyone knows they buy way too many groceries at Costco and they're going to just shove them all in the freezer and take the ice trays out. What are we going to do next Sunday?
you don't have to worry about that.
Finally, there's a pastor's report. I could have just said the pastor reported. There's not much of consequence here, but I mean, there was no motion or anything. There's just some ruminating. And then it was adjourned with prayer again, and then I put my signature on it. That's why I had to make myself Clerk of Session. I didn't have anyone else's signature at the time. So you don't need both signatures. The Book of Order used to ask, I think, at one point it might have been both for everything. And then it was 2 signatures for the annual meeting and 1 signature for other meetings. Or 2 signatures for congregational meetings. 1 for session meetings. Now it's 1 for
Really?
yeah, they actually doesn't say anything, and so Robert's rule says that usually the clerk signs, that's the most, and actually Robert's rule uses the word clerk or secretary, or it can be sometimes it's custom, or the organization can say we want both signatures. But the Peace in USA doesn't say you need both signatures, so, but it's a custom, it's just a custom, like, you keep doing it. I mean, it's not like anyone's gonna mark you off on it. All right, so I think that may be helpful. I also did one for congregational meetings as well that I'll hand to you in a little while. It just kind of goes through some motions.
Paul, can I ask a question real quick?
No. Oh, go ahead.
It used to be that if there were visitors in the room for session meeting, that you were supposed to list who was in the room for the session meeting. I guess that's
It's a
not-
good practice.
Yeah.
I was just realizing, it just says you're supposed to keep a roster or keep attendance of your council. But again, that's a normal practice to do, to say these folks were in the room as well.
But in my understanding of this, if for some reason, like we were talking earlier, there's something that went to court, for instance, they want to know who was in the room at the time of.
That's true, yeah, if something went to court, yeah, maybe they want to know that. I mean, you weren't required to have it there, I guess it can be helpful in some cases, right?
Yeah, it seems like that was one of our training things years ago. But
I'm trying to think why it would be important. I mean, I guess it would be important if it was like, well, this person unduly influenced people, and we saw them slip a $5 bill under the table right before the vote or something. Maybe a $50 bill.
no, I think the point of it was that if they needed more information about
Yeah.
something in the room,
They
they
could
know
ask.
that it was
They could have
there.
another witness, yeah.
So, well, on session meeting, everybody who is interested is welcome to come. But
That's usually the practice, but it's not required. There are some churches that actually have closed session meetings. They're meet in executive session, which is appropriate. I don't think it's necessarily a great practice, but,
yeah, especially when there are sensitive matters.
well, yeah, if there's sensitive matters, we all know that, I mean, I think generally the congregation's like, I'm really interested, but it's like, hey, this is a personnel matter, it has legal.
And that's when they are interested, hey, they need to
Yeah.
hear that. So, but they can attend, but are they allowed to talk? Or they will just listen?
It depends. You can give them, you can ask, the session can allow them to speak or not. I know in a lot of churches, there's really no choice. You just allow them to pipe in. But the session theoretically requires a 2/3 vote to allow someone to speak. It's not a member of session. But usually it's by unanimous consent. Is it okay that, so-and-so's here and they have some information for us? Well, sure, let's hear it. But I also know there's sometimes the problem child, right, that comes to the meetings and has been coming for years and just wants to talk about everything that's not on session anymore, and that can be a problem. So then there's some politics involved in terms of how you, quiet that person without them going out to the coffee shop and bad-mouthing the church or whatever. But yes, you have control over the proceedings and what happens and who speaks. So. I think we've talked about minutes enough, but see here I have name of maker of motion, but not name of second unless it's a custom. General consent is just noted. They often call it unanimous consent, general consent. By general consent or by unanimous consent, it was ordered, or without objection, it was ordered. Any counted votes are technically generally don't have counted votes at a session meeting, but you might do it by ballot, some secret ballot or something. You're supposed to say there were 15 people were eligible to vote, or there were 15 ballots, that's who's voting. So we needed 8, because we needed a majority. And we had 9 in favor and 4 opposed, and apparently an unmarked ballot. So I don't know if I counted right. Names and subjects of guest speakers, but don't try to summarize the remarks. So if you didn't invite someone to the meeting to speak, maybe it's not even a member of the congregation, it's someone from the local Habitat for Humanity or whatever, you don't necessarily need to summarize everything they said. Now it's helpful, right? You think it's really helpful for folks, but it can also just be really challenging, and sometimes it's really challenging to figure out, like, what do I keep and what don't I, and so sometimes it's better at that point to just say, Mr. Smith from Habitat for Humanity reported on their work and invited us to take part. And get the basic standards for session records. And actually, I forgot, these are all together, aren't they? So, on the next page in here is a congregational meeting, hopefully. And I also have to make an example of a counted vote and what that should look like, which should be like a teller's report. I had some fun there. There was a contested election for a deacon or elder, I can't remember which, and somebody lost. That's terrible. I never want to have that happen. There were some terms of call, and I had some thoughts on congregational meetings. I have something on rules and registers. And then in the back, I have a session record review checklist. Hello, welcome.
Go ahead, I'll just listen.
Okay. I can even give you one of these so you can follow along as well. Julia, I think I just saw some stationery from you, and I sort of sent you a reply via
You're
the postal
Paul?
service. Yes, I'm Paul.
Yes,
Yes. I said they're both, you can have them both. They're both
thank you, we took it.
Good. So these are the session records review checklist, which I think is probably helpful. Hopefully it's accurate, but it is, every time I do this, someone points out something that I either added or left off that they challenge, and that's good, because I think that's still in process. So here's what I said, what to leave out. We went over this, right? Procedural motions. Procedural motions could be, procedural motion. I move we take a 10-minute recess so we can, do a biological break or whatever. We don't even put that in there. What are other procedural motions? Can't think of any. Top of my head. Amendments to motions, you leave those out generally. Sometimes you put one in if it's really important, like it seems really important to have the amendment. Or someone says, I made that amendment, I want my name on it or something, well, I guess go ahead. But you normally don't need to, they say why. I mean, it's not really your amendment, it's the body, it's the session number. Thanks for suggesting it. And you can append the reports or keep the reports in another place. We talked a little bit about that, different ways you can keep committee reports and so on. Okay, so here's a little bit about the longevity issues for minutes. We've had a lot of different best practices for minutes over the years, and some of our best practices at the time have turned out to be terrible practices. So, can you use the minute books? Have you seen those with kind of greenish pages, hardbound? You can use those. You can also use a simple binder, because that's often easier now, especially because you don't have to type, figure out how to copy of the pages of your minutes book. When you get around to the minutes you're going to keep as a record, not the ones you necessarily distribute before the meeting, you should put them on archival quality paper. And if you Google that, I think sometimes you can find it, or if you go to a good station or whatever, you can find archival quality paper. It's basically a paper that, I want to say it's like acid-free, and it just stands up better. And actually, storing minutes on archival quality paper is more ecologically friendly than storing them in the cloud. If you think of it as a permanent record, you store them, I can't remember what the breakpoint is, but it's out there. At one point we were telling people to put them in plastic sleeves. You know what I'm talking about? Don't worry about it. And there are actually plastic sleeves that work really well. They're designed for archiving stuff. However, most people were going to like dollar store and going, it's plastic sleeves, all right. And they got them, put their minutes in there, and whatever chemicals are in those plastic sleeves, you can't read those minutes, and it destroys them within years. So don't use the plastic sleeves. They degrade print rapidly. Now, the question is about how you paginate your minutes. So some congregations have books of minutes they've been keeping for years, and they're on page 4,450. But other congregations, and there's no rule, other congregations will say something like, January 2019, maybe as a header or footer, January 2019 minutes, page 1 of 3, right? 2 of 3. And I think that's what I did on the minutes there. I hope I captured the. I did, and actually before it actually had a little more on it. It said session minutes from. And I don't remember what happened. I was messing around with the header and footer, and somewhere in there I ended up deleting it. So there's a couple options for pagination. I do think pagination is helpful because at least you can say. Because normally since we store minutes in chronological order. If we know it's January of 1956, we know where to go. We know generally that's going to be before February, right? So that's sufficient. What to put in your clerk's report? Maybe the minutes of the previous meeting, though that often is a paragraph before the report in terms of the minutes itself. Pertinent correspondence. I remember one clerk when I was moderating a session that had every item that came in. It's like, I don't know, we got this, like junk mail for whatever. Why are we reading this? No, I don't need my windows done, like aluminum works just great. Baptisms, transfers, resignations, deaths, if communion was served and when. That can also be in the worship elders report, but we do report on when communion is served. Which I'm not exactly sure if we have to, because I don't think you have to report every action in the session order.
Our practice has been that in January every year, we approve a monthly communion on the first Sunday of the month, and then we record any additional communion.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a good practice.
That's what we've done.
As individually, if we have an additional time that we approve communion, but we don't have in the minutes the communion was served last, on the first of the month.
Right. And I've seen that, I see that in a lot of these sheets. We've had these reviewed checklists for a long time. But honestly, so I've kind of been better safe than sorry, but I mean, there's all sorts of motions that are happening, we don't say at the next meeting, and by the way, I just want to put in the minutes that we bought that $5-gallon can of roof goop, you know, we don't say that, so,
Oh, but in the same vein, last month at session, we approved communion for tomorrow morning,
Correct.
because it's happening in our building.
that's it, yeah, that's interesting. And I'm not sure you necessarily needed to, but I'm glad you did, because we forgot to. Well, I said to someone like, hey, you know, Presbytery, we're supposed to approve communion when we take communion, and we don't. And they said, but it's in your agenda, right? You approve your agenda. And I was like, well, is it? I better make sure it says worship and communion. If it isn't, I'm going to say, hey, Milt's got my back. Thank you. Thank you. You kept me out of court.
Serving communion, let's say we have regular communion every first Sunday, and then the pastor decides, I want a communion at the end of the year and then the start of the year. So, is that, can the pastor just decide on that, or it has
The
to?
session needs to approve.
Session needs to approve it. So pastors aren't supposed to say like, oh, I'm going to do communion this week. That goes with my sermon, you know?
Anything
is
that's
a
not on a
priority.
regular basis.
Right. Now, I've ran into a situation where, I can't remember what happened, but we used to approve communion in Aurora, you know, in our January meeting, and we started approving through like the next year of January, but we hadn't. And suddenly before the meeting, the Clerk of Session said, oh no, we didn't approve communion for today, you know. We can't serve it. But, you know, we did serve it, because if we hadn't served it, like, that would have been really tacky, because it was like a custom. We've been serving it on the same, you know, the first Sunday of the month for 5 years, and not to serve it would have seemed really odd. I mean, I guess we were theoretically open to some sort of, I mean, but you know, who's gonna call you on that? You're doing the practice of the church, so.
We had another really interesting, we had an outside of the church wedding to be performed in our sanctuary
Okay.
to serve communion.
Oh, okay.
And what we decided was, okay, we are not performing the ceremony. Our pastor must approve the pastor that is going to be conducting the ceremony, but we don't have to approve the communion. That's what we as a session determined. And so Matt met with that pastor, and that pastor was amazed that they were doing communion in the wedding. He had never done it before. It was an interesting
Like the Irish.
That makes sense.
Anglican.
That makes sense to me, because if you had a lease with another congregation using your space, you would be approving all their communions,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
we're sort of leasing them.
So if moving communion, let's say from first Sunday to second Sunday, because the pastor will not be there on the first Sunday, so the
Sure.
session has to approve that too.
I think our minutes say communion will be served monthly on the first Sunday of the month, ordinarily be served month. It will be served monthly, ordinarily on the first Sunday of the
Okay.
month.
Right, and
So
then
we avoid having to make
Yeah.
particular.
and
That's a good plan.
That's where I put it in the minutes after the fact. If it was served on the 20th instead of on the 10th,
Right.
Yeah.
then I put it in the minutes as saying communion was served on the 20th. That way, down the road, if somebody really cares.
Actually, we do both because in January, we will approve that it will be the first Sunday of the month
Yeah.
and Ash Wednesday and Easter, whatever. But then that's only, we're planning on authorizing that, or we've authorized it. So then I also put in, it was served after the fact, so that we have a record that it actually happened. One is you're planning for it, and the other is it actually happened.
Okay. I like that. Let's move on to rules and registers. I gave you a sheet in there about rules and registers, but we should have membership roles that are both chronological and alphabetical, which cross-reference. You technically don't need an alphabetical rule, but it makes a lot of sense. Have you seen, you know what I'm talking about, the roles? Often you have that kind of book, that big book, and so right, because you're keeping that the roles forever, perpetually. So, you know, member number 1 probably had the last name Young, and number 27 had Adams, and you know, they're not alphabetical. So that's why we do that.
I think we need to also include church friends. They're not members, but they attend regularly.
Right, well, we can now keep a roll, I mean, we always could, I guess. You could keep some sort of roll of church friends, they're not members. There's no rule that says you can't, so. And it's not a bad idea, I mean, there's reasons to do that, especially today when we're in transition as a culture about what it means to be members.
And
Membership
actually,
is-
that was one of the questions on this year's statistics. I don't think it was in the statistics, I think it was in the extra questions. They wanted to know how many friends.
The adherents or
Yeah.
friends or whatever you call
Right.
it. We keep those on the electronic roll,
Mhm.
identified as adherents, but they don't appear in the formal written roll book
Right.
Not in the register, yeah.
Right,
in the registry.
right, that's good.
But coming from a review point of view, if you have member numbers that you've been assigning since number one, and now I'm up to 9,000 something, put that, I find that it's good to put that in the minutes when somebody dies or somebody joins the church, because the person who's reviewing the minutes is going to go to the register. I mean, if they're doing a thorough job, they're gonna go to the register and try and find that. And if you have the number, it will make it easier for them to find it in the register.
That's a good point. Well, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've actually changed the session records review based on the Book of Order, which says that when we do our records review, we're reviewing, we have, as clerks, we trade records, if you haven't done this before, but we're doing the act of the presbytery at that point. We're saying, we are the presbytery, reviewing one another, you know, sort of like the teacher saying, correct your hand of paper to the person on your left, and we're grading. We're not grading it, but same idea. So, it says that we will review the proceedings. Well, to me, a roll and a register is not a proceeding. I mean, you would have to, you're right, I mean, to really give a thorough review, you would have to go look at that. And to give a thorough review of the minute said we are going to buy 5 Bibles, you really want to go, not just to the financial report, but you want to go and find the purchase order, right? You know, so I mean, there's a certain level there where we stop. But in the past, we used to do that. Do you want me to talk more about rules and registers? There is something on that rules and registers sheet in here that is from the General Assembly on electronic recording. And this is sort of a new field, how having electronic records. They say at the end that in no case should minutes or records exist only in electronic form after approval. They still think you should have hard copies. That's their policy. And I think we're moving away from that. We're trying to figure out good practices for keeping rolls and registers. And I don't know those off the top of my head. But people are developing them, obviously, and we're learning electronic registers.
Are they speaking of session and congregation minutes here? Because I'd like to start scanning committee minutes to thumb drives or whatever.
I would say yes. Committee minutes would be great to put them either in the cloud or on some sort of, I mean, thumb drives don't last forever either, but yes. So they're talking about rolls and registers, so your membership rolls, because there are some people that want to keep that all electronically. And there are good reasons to do that, except there's also all sorts of issues with that. And then people deleting stuff, it's like, no, it's a permanent record, so.
Paper copy is the original. I have a spreadsheet that should match the paper copy.
So here's the rolls and registers. There's the member rolls, there's active, baptized, and affiliate. You know what an affiliate is? So those are folks that have membership in another church, actually. The Fracks, there you go. Yeah, I was like, friend of the Fracks. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's like in
Are they
this town.
affiliates for you or for me?
Now they're members of Aurora and affiliates in Bandon, but for many years they
Yeah.
were members of Bandon and affiliates.
But like when I went to college, I
Yeah.
kept my membership in my home church, but I was an affiliate member of the church I was attending in the town I went to college.
Right, right. So affiliates, yeah, they have certain privileges that usually are the same for people that aren't affiliates, but they can't hold office or vote. And I was the pastor in Aurora, and Bobby and I, as pastors, had a couple that were in both places, and we shared them. And they were affiliates in my place, but now apparently they are members because I left. They're like, we can join, Paul's gone. All right. Keep baptisms, list of elders, deacons, and pastors. Interims actually aren't often kept, but you can keep interims and temporary supplies in there as well. And then other roles that the session deems necessary. There's often marriage registers. We used to have to keep a registry of all the weddings we did. We don't have to keep that anymore. And I don't know why I put attendance there, but I did. I don't know why I keep attendance rules. But we've got, how much time do we have? We have about 6 minutes. Annual review, it occurs in September and October. There's a list of locations where you get your minutes read. So in the end of August, early September, you'll get a letter from me or email that says it's time to start reviewing your session minutes. And here's a list of churches that have agreed, or maybe ahead of time you'll hear from me like, hey, would you like to host such an event? So a church hosts an event, and other clerks or other people come and bring their minutes there, and everyone swaps minutes, and they read them and they review and make sure everything's in order. And then we use that checklist that was in I think it was on the last page. It was going to be on the first page, but I put it on the last page. This is what people use to do the rolls and registers. So it's a helpful thing as you're going through the year as well. And you'll see some things are for each session meeting. Some are periodic things, like the election of the Clerk of Session may not happen every year if it's a 3-year term or a 2-year term. But if it does, and then what page numbers that it's easily found. By the way, last year we tried electronic review. You do an electronic review where we had people swap minutes electronically. The one person that was really pushing it said, Paul, what was really frustrating is I couldn't just talk to the other clerk. I had to email them. They weren't just there with me. And they were just like, I don't have time for this. And then they realized what they missed. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I hear you. It's hard sometimes to figure out when these happen. We try to do enough of them so that it's not just on a Saturday. But
Yeah, and you'll only have to, if you're lucky, you'll only have to drive an hour or so to get to wherever it's going to happen. Or if you don't like that, you can post it. And then other people will
right.
drive.
Hopefully someone comes to your place because you can't, if you host it, no one shows up, it's a problem. Oh yeah, there we go. Electronic option. Ho-hum. That was my remark there. But you get to meet other clerks. I think it's exciting to read other minutes just because I learned so many great things that are going on. It really is an encouraging thought. I said about rules and registers, and I said earlier, we're not reviewing those at this point. Again, look for the email in late August. Sometimes it's early September, depending on how much fun I'm having over the summer. Then there's these statistical reports. We talked a little bit about that. They're due in early February. We do send a notice in December. There are some people that actually start working ahead on them, and you kind of can. I mean, you don't have the final numbers. You can't, someone could die December 31st at 11:59, so you have to adjust your rolls, right? But you'd probably be aware of those things. So you can start collecting the information ahead of time, some of that stuff. It requires a PIN and a password, and I have that information. And I'll try to send them out. Last year I created a problem. If you saw, I was trying to send this email and people were getting a column, depending on your server or your email program. People were getting all sorts of weird things, and they'd send it back to me and go, look, this is nonsense. But my computer would format it beautifully, like, what are you talking about? So it was this terrible thing, but it was because I did a mail merge so I could put everyone's PIN and password in, because everyone has their own. And and then my server said, you are sending spam, you can't send any more mail, and I had to call it anyway. So never doing that again. If you ever find your PIN and password, a pro tip is to write them on the front page or on the cover of the minutes book or something like that. And they may actually be in there. We've been telling people that for a long time, but even when I was helping our clerk, we were always like, hey, what's the password? Didn't you write it in the minutes book? Oh yeah. Okay. So you can always.
So they don't change from year to year?
They don't. No.
Okay.
So if you
The
know
PIN is forever.
the PIN is forever. You can actually, I think you can change your password because some people have. It always makes it, I guess I can see it so I can tell the next person if you changed your password and forgot to write it down or something. I would have that. Anyway, when you do it, you need to include a summary page in your minutes. How do you do that? I don't know, because when I go in to look at the reports, I have a very different view than you do. But I believe there's a button in the upper right corner that says print. And next year it may change where that is. So we'll tell you how that works when we get there. We'll figure out a way to make sure. But I think people figured it out. There are a few people that had some problems, like, how do I print this off? But there was a way. There was actually 3 ways, I'm told.
And you can print it off after the fact. A couple of years ago, it was hard to figure out how to print it off after the fact, but it's not anymore.
Right. Now, if you go right now and try to print it off, you can't. They're all like, they're working with them somehow, so they've closed it down and you can't even see what you're doing. So I'm not sure why they do that, because I mean, they can obviously close it and still have it available, right? You just don't need to print it, but that's what they do. So here's what the statistical reports includes. Membership, those are stats from the minutes. Congregational life, ages of people in Christian education. For some people that's easy, for other people it's an incredible challenge. Sometimes they have to guess. And then like Christian education, it's like, well, we have, how do you determine like who was just there a guest once, or were they a guest 3 times? At what point are they like a member of the class? There's no standard for it. Do your best, try to be consistent year to year. Racial, ethnic, and disability, they actually say, this is my paraphrase, best guess. One of them was even like hidden disabilities. How many people have hidden disabilities? It was just like, is this a trick question? Like, what's going on here? Raise your hand if you're hidden. All right, and then financial, which was money in, money out, and how the money out was spent. And there's a supplemental and optional questions, which I think some people did. But in the absence, those may change, so
Those are in the Clerks annual questionnaire, aren't they?
No.
Oh, that's
It was a
separate.
different set of questions.
Actually
Yeah.
supplemental.
There was supplemental.
It was supplemental to the statistics,
Yeah,
and it didn't print when you printed the statistics.
interesting.
What do they do with all the statistics?
That's a good question, and the General Assembly will tell you very few people are used. Some of it is used a lot. The membership is used, but a lot of it, they say, we know in the last year like 5 people looked at this. Like, why are we taking these statistics? But again, as I said, the General Assembly has a body of people from different presbyteries. All those in favor, or they press their clicker, right, Ava? And Ava was one of those folks. Say, why not? Let's do it. And so we did.
There is a research arm of the denomination that
Yes.
utilizes information from these
And the funny thing is,
questionnaires.
that's why we have the annual clerks questionnaire, which I'm not even talking about today, which you'll get. That's information people really want, whereas this one is sort of, some of the information we really want, but then other information we hope we want. I don't know.
They guess at what they might want.
There are some required policies. You should have insurance for your church. And just really briefly, since we're almost out of time here, but we are out of time, some companies are better than others. We currently use the insurance board. We know Heffernan and Church Mutual seem like strong options. There have been some companies that aren't really designed to insure churches and may not know the information to ask. So I think at one point we were steering people away from, I want to say, State Farm or Allstate. I'm not sure why, but we just felt like they didn't have good coverage for churches. I personally have State Farm, but I don't insure a church through it. So we can give you more information, like if you call our business office can give you information at the Presbytery. Sexual misconduct policy, each church needs its own policy, not the Presbytery's policy. Insurance providers probably the best place, and there's a sample policy on the PCUSA site. If you give me your email, I can send you a list. I'll send you links to all these. I'm going to give you a bunch of, I'll say it's on the site. I'll give you I'll send you a page that has all the links on it. Okay, I've got yours. Do you want it? Okay. I'll just send it to
We approved a new policy
Okay.
this year, but I don't know that it's been sent to you yet.
Some people have the same policy. It's like what do they call it? Safe Church, I think, is one that's designed for both. You are supposed to have 2 policies. I'm not exactly sure what the rationale is. You're supposed to have a child and youth protection policy, which again I don't understand, because to me those 2 terms are used to apply to the same body of people. But it's a separate document from the sexual misconduct policy. Insurance board, Safe Church has resources, and I will send you, I've already made the page up that I can send you that has a link to resources on child protection and a good a template for a policy. And your own insurance carrier may also have good resources, because they have an interest in this, in protecting people, financial interest, unfortunately or fortunately, but that's it. This is my last slide, even though I told you there was more. The 5 Clerk of Session duties, correspondence, the agenda. Oh, these are other duties. I don't know why it still says 5 up there. Some clerks work on the agenda, sometimes they work with the pastor on that. There's no formal rule that says whether you do or don't. It's often helpful, especially if there's business being carried over. It wasn't, if you didn't get to all the business in the meeting, to let people know, let the moderator know. Rolls and registers, reporting to the PC, USA and the Presbytery was the minutes, compliance with policies, insurance, sexual misconduct, and child protection. We used to use that as that was part of the review process. And we encourage sessions to, in their minutes, review those policies every year. I never understood why. The Presbytery itself doesn't review its own policy every year, and I'm not saying it's not a good practice. I do think we're going to review our policy again. Actually, our policy is from 1998, so it's been bad to review at our level. Though it's a fairly well-written policy, so that's why we've kept it. We have reviewed it and just not changed it. But we're going to review and change that. So I have another way of trying to collect all that information. Okay. If you have other time, let's see. That's right.
I have one comment on the policies that
Yes.
has to do with misconduct. One thing that we all need to be aware of is we focus on children and youth and clergy. Vulnerable adults, we have a lot of.
Yeah.
And vulnerable adults need to be incorporated into your policies so that your whole membership is protected.
That's a really good point. And I wouldn't be surprised if we are required to have a vulnerable adult policy at some point.
And it's just going to be another phrase.
But it's just
that
really helpful to have it somewhere in, the sexual misconduct policy or whatever language that protects. I do have it's a little bit on agendas. I don't know if that's helpful. Someone asked about, a few useful motions of parliamentary procedure. The treasurer's report, this was actually designed for a different thing. It's too small maybe, but it says the treasurer's report should not be accepted. It's the review or audit that is accepted. Whenever you accept a report, you agree with everything in it. You're actually putting the treasurer and other yourselves in jeopardy. You're suddenly liable for that. So when it's been reviewed or audited by an auditor, the auditor's taking some responsibility. So that's when you normally, you don't need to accept reports. Certainly not the treasurer's report. I think we already went.
Did you say received?
Yeah, treasurer's report was received. Yep. But when you get like an auditor review, or however that's done in your church, then that could be accepted.
In our church, that is done by the trustees. And we have session and receive it from them.
Right, okay, perfect. If you've reached the end of the agenda, you don't need a formal motion to adjourn. Is there any other business? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. So sometimes moderators also are like, can you have a motion to adjourn? If you have an agenda, you can adjourn. If you want to adjourn early, that's a right of people as well. They can say, hey, I'm done. That's a privileged motion. That is very high rank. Get out of there easy. Small board rules, we talked about that, right? So this is Robert's Rules of Order for small boards.
And they're actually in the book somewhere.
They're in the book.
Small board rules.
I don't have my book with me, but I think it's under boards in Robert's Rules of Order. And it says it's designed for smaller organizations. So the session usually equals a small board, 12 members or less. 12 members, give or take, or less. It's more about controversy. It's up to the moderator to decide. So the moderator can say, we're going to use the full rules. But there's no need to rise to speak or make motions. Like normally at a session meeting, you don't rise but that's actually a Robert's Rule of Order. You're supposed to stand up, which, it's
Designed for general assembly level
right?
things.
You sit at the table, you maybe raise your hand, or you say, I've got a point. Motions don't have to require a second. Some people say it's a really good idea to have a second. The second means that you can't just have any crackpot motions out there with the person speaking about it. At least one other person has to say, whether I agree or not, we need to hear about it. That's why when we have Presbytery meeting, when a report comes from a committee, it doesn't require a second, because we know there was more than one person that agreed to it. Informal discussion is okay if no motion is on the floor. So this happens all the time. Like in this meeting, we're like, we need a motion before we start talking. The moderator can speak to issues without leaving the chair. So normally the moderator would have to leave the chair and go, I want to speak to this issue, but it doesn't happen in small meetings. And that's the end. Any questions?
Yes.
If we have the handout like that.
Then I will, actually, I will send you this handout
Okay.
as well.
Thank you.
It's one of the links on my sheet. So, and if some of you know me and send me an email if I totally forget this whole thing happened by the end of this meeting, everyone will greatly appreciate it. Any other thoughts or comments before we go? I got
My question is,
Oh,
are you going to, when you sort it out, are you going to give us some more information on the electronic meetings? Because it's still an area of a lot of disagreement.
yes. So the PCUSA has a policy on electronic meetings, and they allow them. Robert's Rules allows them. My concern is this: the session, in many cases, is the directors, considered the directors of the corporation in state law. State law has very clear rules about electronic meetings. If you have an electronic meeting, everyone on that board, so everyone in session would have to vote. And
And
all
they all
votes
have to agree.
would have to be a unanimous vote. by
Yeah.
everyone.
Or you can't
So-
do, then you have to.
So in the Presbytery, we have the Presbytery Leadership Commission, which some people think is like a session. But what's nice about the Presbytery Leadership Commission is it's not the Board of Trustees, which our bylaw says, for the state of Oregon's purposes, is our directors. So our Board of Directors, when we meet electronically, we don't meet by email. We don't take email votes as trustees. We do, there has to be simultaneous hearing and speaking. So that's the Robert's Rules, and that's what most states adopt too. They don't like proxy votes. They want people to hash these things out and make these decisions. So that's kind of my question is, can sessions do this, or are there some votes sessions can take and cannot? I mean, depending on the religious nature of them. I mean, adopting curriculum, I think, is different than purchasing a piece of land or entering into a lease, right, which is a legal and enforceable sort of thing. I guess curriculum could be too, but, so I'm not quite sure on that. I'm like puzzled. And no one's given me the answer I want. I probably don't want to pay an attorney $500 to hear the answer, but I will at some point. I'm still working the free channels right now. So, but information's only as good as what you pay for, I guess. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm a little hesitant to say what you can do as a session. Any other questions or thoughts?
Thank you.
No. Thank you for being here. This was fun. I hope I didn't move around too much. Partly because my shoe is falling apart. Careful.
Oh,